Hello and welcome to the Creativity Conference's official podcast. My name is Aidan Rhode. I'm the Assistant Manager at the Creativity Conference. And in this podcast, I'll be discussing all aspects of creativity with some world-class creatives who we are lucky enough to have joining us as speakers for the Creativity Conference. Today, I'm joined by John Thomas Dodson, who is an incredible, world-renowned orchestra conductor and musical director, and more recently the founder of Blue Heron Mindfulness Living. He delivered some absolutely fantastic presentations and panels for us in our online iterations of the conference back in August and January 2021. John, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Speaking of your time at the online conferences last year, how did you find the conference, and did you manage to attend any other sessions other than your own?
I did, and I loved it. What I found was this wide array of subjects that were covered. More importantly, a wide array of approaches. What you could really hear was each person talking had their way into the creative door, and they had kind of their takeaways for their process. So checking in with that was wonderful. You would get ideas, but moreover, and this was really important, was you felt like I was in a room of people that I knew, even though I'd never met them before. We all had these things that we shared together, including this activity of being whatever it means to be a creative. And so the specifics of what they did, that was their world, but the things that were threads that ran around from session to session often just include a viewpoint, this kind of openness to what if, and then where people went with what if and how they did it. It was really, really fun to see that.
And that's something that is so integral to the heart of the Creativity Conference, and it's entirely why we do this, is getting people from all these disciplines and getting them together into a room and finding these commonalities of the creative process and accessing a flow state, and how that is sort of universal throughout all aspects and facets of the creative industry. I mentioned earlier that you founded the Blue Heron Mindfulness Project back in 2018. How is that going, and what are some of your other current creative projects?
Well, I think of Blue Heron as sort of an ancillary thing, although it has become pretty important to me. I do a lot of work with mindfulness for performers, and I'm doing something coming up in the spring at Oberlin College Conservatory near Cleveland, Ohio, an amazing school, and with a long, long history of fascinating people who have been through the alumni of that school. It's incredible. And what I find is that performers have often common problems or issues. And the thing that is interesting is usually those problems and issues are created within ourselves. That they're less about, they may feel like they're about exterior, conflict and exterior conditions, but actually often they simply are, how do we approach that? And do we have a way to reframe that? And what's our practice inside? So I love it if I can work with young or developing artists, or sometimes master artists, who simply say, I'm a little stuck right here, and can you help get me out of this block where I'm in? Or I've got a pattern and I've got an approach, and I think I've run it to the end of its road, and I need a new way of beginning. So for me, that really is fun. We all have issues of perfectionism, of stage fright, of being seen, of fear of failure, all these kinds of things. And those things really interest me because they are the shadow side of something really light and fabulous. But we kind of get stuck on one side of the coin, and we can't get around, to the other side of the moon, whatever metaphor you want. But we can't get there sometimes without a little help to say, oh, you know what, actually these two things belong together. And this is just half, I'm seeing half the picture. So I'm looking forward to that, to continue the work with that. I've been working on an aspect of that by some books I'm reading that are helping me to create some technological supports around that in between sessions, so that people can use their, devices to help continue some kind of practice work in between, because I find what ends up happening is everybody means to do it. We all mean to do a lot of things, but it becomes really, really hard to establish daily habits and practices and routines to keep this really important stuff in our life. So to try to simplify that, make it easy, make it available to people on a click is valuable. And so I've been working at that. It's a lot of learning for me. It's fabulous, though, really interesting. Then I'm working with an orchestra that's in Cleveland, made up of women. It's the oldest women's orchestra in continuous operation in the country. And they were founded at a time when women were not allowed in the major orchestras. So I didn't know this. There's a whole history of that, of orchestras that came to be around the United States when women weren't permitted into the New York Philharmonic or into the Cleveland Orchestra or whatever. Crazy, but it's the way it was. So I happened into it. I was doing a concert for them, or with them, for their late music director. And that was in 2019, I think. And we ended up working with each other during this period. I'm about to finish with them with a final concert in the spring. There are just, I don't know, there are lots of things that seem to be going on. I have found the pandemic era to be the most creative time. And I'm not sure why, except that it broke all the routines up and the structures and the patterns. And for some people, I think that really drove them crazy. But for me, it was very freeing.
Right. So you found that you were more enabled creatively by the pandemic rather than stifled.
I wasn't stifled by it. Yeah, I think I realized, I sort of immediately thought of this like, this is an enforced sabbatical. Mm-hmm. And everybody's got it. And then how do you use a sabbatical? So part of that was to recharge in whatever ways I could while trying to stay safe. And I did a lot of reading and then a lot of reconnecting where I could to people that, you know, the kind of email of I've meant to be in touch and I haven't. I was telling somebody the other day, I got an email once that was hilarious. It said, "Happy birthday." And I thought, I wasn't born this month. And then the next paragraph said, you know, the reason I say this, I know it's been long enough that you have had a birthday between my last email and now, which really broke me out. But it was great because it sort of meant during this window of time, you could go back and reopen relationships because what were we going to do while we were stuck inside? And then it really allowed, in a way, for me to think more about the community of my life, around my life. Also, as we gradually, you know, figured things out of how we could see each other online in ways that had seemed really mysterious to us before the pandemic and then became ubiquitous, you know, that was all part of it. And I found also that I needed to give myself permission to stay alive in my spirit. That was really, really important. So I had to give myself permission to heal and to do self-care and loving kindness and all these kinds of practices that were just really essential to getting through a dark time. I was losing friends to the pandemic and people that I knew, and people around me were having that. And so I think for a lot of us who are, I can't speak for somebody else, but at least for me, you feel really connected to the loss, to what the grieving that was happening. I ended up doing some talks during the pandemic to just deal with some of the stressors that were coming up. I was reading about, you know, domestic violence going up, loss of hair going up. Dentists had a field day because everybody was grinding their teeth, and, you know, all these kinds of things that were part of the stressors and addictions going up, all these kinds of things that were happening as a response to, man, I'm way out of control of this. This is far beyond what one individual can deal with. So yeah, I found it to be, interestingly enough, a doorway into some other practices and other things, or just a deepening of what I was doing.
You said earlier that you work a lot with performers musically. I would have thought that there's a huge amount of mindfulness and mental control that has to be employed, not just by performers, but by yourself when you're conducting a philharmonic orchestra,
right,
for example. What is the overlap between the two endeavors of yours, the mindfulness side and the orchestra side, and how does creativity play into them both?
It's a great question, and the key actually to the whole thing. I didn't realize when I began a mindfulness practice how it would be changing me as a conductor. I can actually say it had nothing to do with any of the goals that I had. And I think one of the things that one learns in this practice is it has all these unexpected benefits, and probably in each life, those benefits are unique to the particular lifestyle. But for me, as somebody who is working with musicians, where the musicians are making the sound, and I am helping to enable that process in some kind of way. Then also there's the learning of the score and retaining it in your head, memorization, but also one's perception of time and how much time there is. I actually found out, I have a former student who got a tattoo of something I taught. I had no idea this until, just honestly. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit of what? You taught something and somebody got a tattoo about it. But I was telling the students that time, our perception of time is really malleable. And one of the things that I've come to understand through mindfulness is a second isn't a second. And an hour isn't an hour, and all of that. There's a lot more time in that than appears, but only if you can access that time, right? So I sort of think about it like, let's pretend that I'm driving down the road at 35 miles an hour, and I don't know if I can do this, but let's do it like that. And this is me going down the road, and that's my life speed. And other cars are going down the road at another speed. So we're kind of doing like this, right? I'm not really in alignment with those other cars in terms of time. Our perceptions of time are very different. When I go into practice and I'm sitting, my perception of time opens quite a bit. So the sense of how long is this second? Well, right now it's a second. But if I'm inside kind of an altered state, which is to say I'm actually just no longer distracted by the zillions of things that are coming in, getting in the way of just the flow of life itself, there's actually a lot of time in that second. Now, that's a real second. That's life as it actually is. That's flow. Let's call it that. So those cars going different speeds is a little bit like that. I'm going along like this, and then life, if you will, is going along like that. And I'm trying to shoot my little arrow into the window of this other car and align with it. But it's a constantly moving target for me as I'm doing that. On the other hand, if I were at the same speed, it's very easy to shoot into that car and to actually hit things where I mean for them to be. So what I found was that when you could begin to access the state of mindfulness, just in the loose way that we're talking about it right now, let's just stay in this kind of like top of the tree thought, that it was a lot easier to align the arrows. Moreover, I could hear things much more clearly of where is something rubbing up that isn't in alignment. I could hear and this was wonderful, a sense of possibility inside that moment that simply hadn't existed in my awareness before. It was there. I just couldn't get to access that. But in addition, the practice of mindfulness really unveils an underlying state of kindness. And that kindness begins to pervade the way you want to interact with your world. So a conductor on a podium begins to change, this one did, in the way I would speak to an orchestra, in the way I would interact with an orchestra, in what I could believe about the orchestra, in the possibilities I could begin to see with the orchestra. It isn't that you're not at times pretty demanding and you've got to call out something, and that isn't what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you don't add abrasion when it just is not a necessary thing. You're not continuously adding that stuff. There isn't the need for that. Conflict is going to happen in the sense that things aren't the way we want them to be, and we have to find our way to get there. But we're talking about something else, which is, this kind of unkind way of living. So I found that the process actually started to shift my relationships. This also meant in my personal relationships, I could listen longer and I didn't wander away. So that one of the things that I love now is that if I'm having a conversation, I'm having a conversation. I really am there. I'm not preparing to speak again. I'm just actually able to be in this unfolding moment with somebody. I love that because it's far more connective. And so as a conductor, there's that kind of connectivity. With the score, you can hold the piece in your mind much more clearly because the mind isn't wandering away. And so you're actually able to stay with it. And then within time itself, there's a lot more time to work with than there has been earlier in my life.
And that's a skill that is incredibly useful, but is incredibly hard to be taught formally. I was speaking to Louisa Winters in episode 10 of the podcast, who's also an incredibly high-level violinist, pianist.
I love her, actually. We're dear friends.
Yes, and she said that in one session of the Creativity Conference back in August, I can't remember who she said, but one of the musician speakers said in a talk that studying music formally and academically destroys is maybe a strong word, but destroys creativity because it teaches you right from wrong and how to think according to the books and not to your own imagination per se. As somebody yourself with over 10 years of formal academic training, what do you think about that? Do you think that formal...
I know what she's talking about, and I think that it can. I think it can stifle, especially if you get into the illusion of I have to imitate. Imitating is fine. We all do it. We learn to speak by imitating, right? We listen, and I don't think that we think of that as being a particularly bad thing, but it is what we need to do to develop the skill. But there's a danger side of getting to the place where, and I think we've all seen it, where imitating someone else's thought and imitating someone else's viewpoints or life means that we're no longer authentic to our own. I think that's where the danger comes, especially in certain kinds of music that are continuing a tradition. So if I'm playing Schubert Ninth, I'm not the first person to play Schubert Ninth. And I would like to be part of a long conversation of other great musicians who have played Schubert's Ninth Symphony. But if I'm imitating Furtwängler's Schubert Ninth, or George Zell's, or Carl Böhm's, I'm still not playing a Schubert Ninth that's authentic to my life experience. All I've done is learn how to say a poem like somebody else says it. So there's a great teacher he's a Zen teacher, and he speaks about 360, and this has been the key for me. So going around a circle, right, you start at 0. And if I'm going a portion around this circle, I'm getting up to the place where he would speak about being attached to form. And that might be the place where we're talking about, where I'm up to a place I can see Schubert's Ninth and I know the traditions of Schubert's Ninth, right? And then I learn, and I get a little bit further and I come around into the middle. And in this middle, I see beyond the traditions of Schubert's Ninth, right? And now I get attached to emptiness. This is a really interesting problem. I get attached to emptiness. But there's some point where I keep moving around in his circle, and this is where I wanted to get to. Finally, I come to the place of, well, I'm going to do my Schubert Ninth. Oh, the great me. Now I'm attached to freedom. And then, sorry, let's do it this way, yeah. And we're coming around, and I get back to 0, which is 360. But 360 isn't 0. I get back at 360. I've made this journey all the way around. I'm back where I started, but I've been changed. So I could think of it like this instead of like on one plane, but more like I was doing a circle like that. I'm ascending. Where am I when I'm back? I'm at beginner's mind. I'm a master, and I'm willing not to know. That's Miles Davis. You know, I'm a master, and I'm willing to make something brand new right in this moment. And it will rest on shoulders of giants, but it won't be the shoulders of those giants. I think that's a really important place in art. Yes, everybody, we all can dabble, and I love to do art. And I sent you things that just showed, you know, activities, and I give myself permission to be a photographer, or be a painter, to sketch, and to write a poem, and all these kinds of things. But in music, I have done all that back work that is there too, right? And I've made my journey around, and then the question is, can I get to that 360 point? And I love this. You can see it with Picasso, and you can see it with a lot of these wonderful artists. They do a journey, and the journey includes returning. And when they return, Matisse, look at Matisse. He you know, it is, one of the phrases I wrote, it takes an adult to be childlike. You know, you have to really go around the circle, because a child is being a child without anything other than the authenticity of childhood, right? But is it possible for us to regain that place, that 360 place? Can we come back around and we're childlike, we're playful, we don't know, but we do know? That's an amazing place to be, because the world then is filled with this possibility, but also volition and the power of what we learned around that circle.
The childlike wonder can prove so like the world is your oyster. There's so much inspiration all around you to draw from,
and not easy to get to it.
No.
For a child, the world really is wonder, because everything is new. But the further we go into life, I've been thinking a lot about this when we establish habits. And initially, habits, and they're great. Habits are fabulous. But then in mindfulness, you start talking about habitual behavior, and it means that we've sort of gotten where we respond habitually to things, right? And so initially, I think one then deals with, let me throw away habits so that I can be this improvisatory thing, and I'm spontaneous. Yeah, great. But I was talking last night with an absolutely fabulous, world-class violinist, and we were discussing habits. And I said, I've come to the place where I've really gotten interested in an idea called layered mind. That's the term I give it, of habitual mind, meaning the mind that I've used to train myself how to play or to make music or to whatever activity I'm doing. The mind that you use when you write a letter. You don't stop and, the letter A looks like this. You write a letter, right? Or you type, or whatever you do. That's habitual, that's automated mind. But the beauty of the letter is, if that skill is set up habitually to a place where you've mastered it, then you're free to say, what's the content of my letter? That opens up a tremendous amount of space up here. So habit isn't the enemy, actually. What's the enemy is not doing this additional space up here. Or if I never really develop the domain knowledge of my area and the expertise, the mastery of whatever that is, then I'm still having to think, oh gosh, I got to play the G sharp. It's really vital that I play this note. I have to be careful I'm using up all my bandwidth, but I'm not getting to enter that other space that is the creative space, right? So part of achieving mastery isn't so that you'll be automated in that part. It is so you can be spontaneous in that part, because you did the work of automation, because you did the habitual work, because you did the hard work. And that's a really interesting place. Can I do this, what some, coaches or whatever, the boredom of do it again, do it again, do it again. And why? So that you can drive that place so firmly in that then I can say, but what do I actually want to say here? What is this? What is the conversation I'm having with the art? And that is a very, very different altitude.
Mm. And have you employed these motions, these ideas in your work in the Dominican Republic as a music director? You've spent a lot of time there. How has that impacted potentially your creativity and your perspective on approaching these things?
Yeah, one way that this has come up. Officially, I'm an orchestra conductor, right?
Yes.
Although, again, I think that the idea of taking on these categories can be very limiting. So there was a point at which we had done a series of orchestra concerts, and I got very interested in, I'm interested in spaces and the way repertoire and spaces may have a conversation, right? So in the Dominican Republic, we're performing in a lot of buildings that go back into the 1500s or the 1600s, or maybe a renovation when Bach was alive. It's a crazy idea. Wow, this place was renovated and Bach was alive. So that's an interesting conversation about, can you reveal anything in that space that connects to the era of the building and the music, let's say, or can you connect to something in the present time that makes a commentary and connects back into the past, so that we are not merely looking as museum pieces backwards, but actually part of this ongoing conversation. So I remember I had invited a chorus and a brass group, and normally each one performed alone. And I asked if we could combine these two things, where it would at times alternate and at times work together, and it would mean that it had a very wide possibility for the way the music might work. And though I'm a conductor, I asked the choral conductor if she would conduct most of the concert. The brass quintet was not going to need a conductor. I would only conduct two pieces out of the concert. And one of them I wanted to conduct without the chorus being seen, or without without me being seen. Often I hate it that we have to watch a concert. We say we want to watch a concert when it's an oral experience. So I wanted to, at one point then the brass group was playing on stage, and silently the orchestra was going up a very old stairwell to a balcony and going to the back in the area behind where the audience was. When the brass group finished and walked off stage, the lights darkened, and suddenly I was conducting a piece which was written maybe 15 years ago, but connecting that piece, connected to Gregorian chant, connected to all this ancient music from a very modern perspective. And here was an audience sitting, really just listening to an orchestral conductor, not conducting an orchestra, but a chorus, and not being seen. And then when it finished, I remember there was this rather long moment of silence, and then this huge, a different kind of applause. It's just a conversation and applause, right? You can just clap, static thing or shouting or whatever. There's something else that is this really, really rich inside the soul experience. And I knew that we had done that connection. Interestingly enough, then the choral conductor, when we went to program the concert, said, well, that leads me to, if you want to do this piece, here's another piece I want to do that was by a British composer, living, actually he just died not too long ago, whose music was even more challenging to the ear. And she said, I want to connect that to Palestrina. So Palestrina is, the Renaissance era time of the Sistine Chapel, all of that, right? In this old church that has the old bones of existence, the really fascinating thing. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you are moving out of categories, you get a chance to play, to really play, and to create in a way that isn't stuck with these fences that end up giving us the same product over and over again. There's almost nothing more boring than looking at certain symphony programs and seeing the same repertoire over and over and over again coming. And what you get this sense of is, yes, I've seen that concert and I've seen it 50 times. Um, why do I need to see that again? Can you give me something that adds a dimension into this? One could say, well, yes, the performance itself, and that's absolutely true. The musicians, it is brand new and coming alive. But I'm really talking about the sort of a culture of programming that becomes rather limiting, and really talking about opening that so that it has a bigger possibility to it. Going the other way, there was another concert where I didn't conduct at all. We invited a group in, and they came with period instruments and played Bach in a building built in the same year that he wrote the Brandenburg Concerti. And I didn't conduct at all other than facilitating that concert. So am I conductor that day? Yes, I was, but a different kind of conducting. That was conducting an idea and bringing these people together into a space that was an historic space, but also brought masters from Boston to come in and say it is like this. And then what I did as a conductor around it was to do a lot of lectures and talking and trying to draw people in so that they would have a broader experience that they could apply to what they were hearing.
And conductor is a very broad term that can apply to a vast number of things.
Yeah.
And as a conductor in all shapes and forms that may be, you've obviously worked on a lot of projects with a lot of amazing people over your career thus far. Are there any projects that you've worked on or examples in particular that are potentially lesser known about or underappreciated, but you have a bit more of a soft spot for, you're particularly proud of, and you maybe wish more people knew about?
It's a terrific question. The first thing I thought you were going to ask a slightly different question, so the one that you've asked is the one I'll try to answer. But I do want to say this, that you were talking about working with people. Sometimes when you work with people, you take things away from them that are life teachings. One was somebody who was a performer who was older in his life, a little further along in his career, and he played well, but he had played better in the rehearsal than the performance. I think he just got a little bit tired. And what I loved about him was when it was over, he spoke about what went well, and he didn't get stuck. And I thought, this is how he was able to have this really arc of a life, because we're so used to just self-attack. We just go to what didn't work, or the place we go, the place here that wasn't perfect. But actually to revel in what you were able to do is really life-giving to the spirit and keeps you going. There was another one who, she is a tremendous artist. And in the course of the week, each time we worked together, every rehearsal, she radically changed the piece. So if yesterday it went forward here, today it went backwards. And if yesterday it went left, today it went right. And if it was soft, today it was, so many things. She still was playing the score. I don't want to say she wasn't. She was just, she was really looking 360 around that score and examining it each time. And as we walked on stage to give the performance, over her shoulder as she walked on, audience is applauding, she says, "I'll be changing some things." And she went to her instrument. And I went, wow. And what I found was, what had she taught? Flexibility, being in the moment, waiting for the gods to come, to, allowing space for that. And that was a life lesson, rather than let me just do it one way. She was a master. It was each time there was another way. And this new way opened up possibilities that it was just always unraveling another road diverging in a yellow wood. It was just always opening another part of the poem that could go another way. And it was so satisfying to do that. I think some players didn't like it because they didn't know what to anticipate, and the perfectionist in them, they were like, is it this way or that way? Because I want to do it. But there was something else she was teaching, which was really, again, Zen master stuff. It was really spontaneous, and it was opening up. It was being jazz, even though the piece was not jazz. So I love that memory. Things that I've done that are, you said, do I wish something more about? I think that the thought that I have is not like that. It's actually a little different than that. It's a good question. I'm not saying it isn't. It's that it implies that in wanting to do something, you're trying to do something so someone can know about it. And I think so, I want to go to that because I think that that's also part of creativity, right?
Yes.
That sometimes, like Walt Whitman would sometimes write articles, and he would bring up something to get himself back in the world of conversation. So why people, he wants them to go to Leaves of Grass and see it and read it. He knows what he's made, and he's trying to get back into the conversation so that people will experience the art. I understand that. And in a kind of an Instagram world and all of that, I understand what people are trying to do. I get it. But at the fundamental, and so you do want to connect. So to say it, even Arnold Schoenberg, the goal is this to be understood, which is really interesting coming from somebody like Schoenberg to say, yet he's absolutely right. You want to put it out there and have it apprehended by your audience. Unless the purpose of making it is not about the authentic experience of me as a creator. If the thing I'm doing now, I'm pandering. So I'm trying to draw this distinction between the two. And I'm actually using your question as a way to speak about that. That there's something dangerous in chasing them knowing everything about what you're doing, where that's the goal. And there's something else, which is the willingness to come in and do this kind of work because it needs to get made. This thing just needs to get made. And you are really become willing to be that maker. I think there's a quote, if it's true, I hope it's true, but I don't know, maybe apocryphal, but from Schoenberg saying, I didn't want to be Arnold Schoenberg, but somebody had to do it. And even if he didn't say it, it's a little bit like that he takes on the mantle of what the music was as he saw the next evolution in music. It isn't that he can't write a certain way, listen to Transfigured Night, obviously he can't. It's that he feels it's necessary to go to a place and he's willing to take on that cross to go up and do it. And I think that is also part, even as a performer, you may say, I need to play this piece. I need to establish trust with my audience so they can go here with me, but they need to come into this piece with me. And sometimes you do that knowing there will be criticism. Sometimes you do it because it will stretch people. Either the length of this piece is a little long, right? I'm not doing and that too is part of the work. I remember Karel Husa, who is a Czech composer, Pulitzer Prize winner. And for him, he used to like to go back and read the reviews of Beethoven's symphonies during Beethoven's lifetime, because the reviews so often were just baffled by what Beethoven was doing. So, we have Beethoven, everybody thinks, oh, it's Beethoven. It's even so, oh, it's just so Beethoven. I'm sick and tired of Beethoven. Well, in those days, Beethoven was not simply new, but really shattering a lot of norms. And naturally, since it was brand new, people didn't have a reference point for it. The reviewers, poor things, are the ones who have to write that down. So they write, I'm not sure about this, that he seems to be very brilliant and he seems to be capable and all this, but why is Eroica so, long and it seems sprawling and they don't know what he's doing yet? Except for Beethoven, Eroica is an absolutely essential leap that he has to make. Or for Stravinsky, Rite of Spring is that leap. Or for Wagner, Tristan is that leap. And we could go on and on and on. That it isn't that somebody doesn't want to make something that will connect to the audience. It's that the art itself is asking, even demanding, expression. And then the faith of the artist is that someplace along the way, somebody will come along with you. And sometimes it's a really dangerous place to be. I think it was very dangerous for Mahler to be Mahler, to be a Jewish composer in Vienna, in Catholic Vienna, who's converted to Catholicism so he can get the job conducting at the Opera House, but writing music that is overtly Jewish at certain points in his symphonies, and writing symphonies that involve enormous orchestras and enormous spans of time. And the same thing, let's say, for Bruckner, someone half generation slightly before him, doing the same, or for Beethoven to do the leap of Eroica. But there's no doubt that Beethoven knew what Eroica was, and it was a necessary journey. And I think sometimes art is just a necessary journey, and we become people willing to be courageous enough to step into that necessity and to accompany the art into being. Sounds like we're making it. I know we speak about creativity, but I'm not always sure what's being created. I think we're makers and maybe collaborators with the making of art. It may be that we collaborate instead of create.
Yeah, that's a very insightful and thoughtful answer to that question, and also great use of the word apocryphal. That's one of my favorites. On that sort of last note that you had there, there's a question that I've asked every speaker that I've had on this podcast at the end of every episode. Very open question, easy to ask, maybe difficult to answer, but I feel like you have a good grasp of how to answer this. And it's just, as a creative, what does creativity mean to you?
Yeah. To make something that had not been. I heard last week in a conversation, there was a mother and she was talking about her daughter who's part of an arts collaborative in Chicago, and they refer to themselves as makers rather than creators. They're painters and they're visual artists of these types, but she will say to her mom, yeah, she's a maker too, and that one, he's a maker too, a maker. What do we make? We're going, what Stephen Pressman says is that we shift, we go between the realm of possible things and the realm of what is. And he says, our skill is to cross that threshold back and forth. What could be, and then what is, and then to keep moving across the threshold and go in there and get stuff and then come back and work with it out here. And at times we know what we're making, and at times we find out what we're making. We find out along with the process. It seems like you've got some master plan, and you do, in the sense that I want to make. But then there's this big dialogue taking place, and I think this is space-time. What's here and what's now, and process. What's changing, because that's the constant. So it seems to me we go into this realm, the imaginal door. We go through that imaginal door. We go over there, and there's this, if you will, room full of could be. And we get some of that. And we bring it over here, and then back in this realm, we work with that. And could be becomes is, but it isn't necessarily always the is we planned. It's something that begins to reveal itself. I was sketching something the other day, and it's a sketch from a picture, but I wasn't redrawing the photograph. I wanted to interpret what that photograph meant. What I found was really interesting. The guy I was drawing the picture of was married to the artist of the art behind him. So I had taken this photograph. And what I found was really interesting was, as I began to sketch him, one half of his face darkened. It became one with the painting behind him. I didn't know it was going to happen. But when it happened, it was his love for her. She's dead now. And what I saw was the oneness between half of him, which became enveloped in her art, the metaphor of her, what is left. Did I know that when I began? No. Did I even know it when I was doing the half of the face? No, actually. I began to realize that what was being said, what the piece was asking, that wasn't the photograph anymore that I was working from, but the conversation happening with the materials. And so there's a could be, there's your plan, and then there's what comes out at the end, which may or may not even be something that you can give words to. And I think, frankly, often you shouldn't. We're trying to do it right now. We're inside the realm of words, but this is very linear and because of that, rather limiting. But art itself, it spirals out. It has a lot of different platforms operating and dimensions at once. And just to work with one of those, like we're having to work right now, in time with words, yeah, that's a part of it. And we're doing our best, I think, to speak about something that maybe is ineffable. But to answer your question, I think creativity is the doing of that, the doing of going to what could be and bringing it into the realm of what is.
That's a very concise and very brilliant way to put it. And I'm sure we could chat about all of this for hours and hours on end, but there's only so many hours in a day. So that's all we have time for in this episode. Thank you so much for joining me, John. It's been a really lovely discussion.
For me as well. Thank you very kindly for having me and for your thoughtful questions. And I look forward to continuing to be involved in this wonderful endeavor to the Creativity Conference.
Of course. And you're thinking of joining us in Iceland in
I'm planning
August.
to. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
Wow. Yes, that's going to be amazing. So I can't wait to see you there. And hopefully we'll get to see some of you listening there as well as attendees. It's going to be a wonderful experience. And get your tickets as soon as you can.
Take care. Thank you again.